Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our monthly seminars where we try to bring to our clients those issues and those topics that we think are important. So my name is Bill Wilson. I'm one of the firm's partners. And the other Wilson was my dad, who started the firm in 1963. As you may know, our firm concentrates in the area of estate planning, elder law, and special needs planning. We have offices in LaGrange and Northbrook, but we do travel to clients' houses, hospitals, and long-term care facilities. This afternoon, Kent Wilbrook, a long-term care specialist, and I will discuss long-term care insurance. Do I need it? Should I buy it? After the discussion, there will be plenty of time for questions and answer if you would like to ask either one of us anything about long-term care insurance, or for that matter, anything about long-term care. The presentation will be recorded, and so let me tell you a little bit about Kent. Kent is a graduate of Guy's School of Business at the University of Illinois. For 15 years, he has advised clients concerning overall insurance matters, especially now he concentrates as a care funding specialist in the long-term care insurance industry, where he assists clients with funding for long-term care. He's a broker for many long-term care carriers and works out of Aurora, Illinois. So Kent, why don't we get on with it? So any personal experience that you may have in long-term care, either funding or insurance?
Absolutely. First of all, Bill, thank you very much for allowing me to join you today to talk about a very important topic. As Bill mentioned, I actually have two personal experiences that have really driven and motivated me to focus in the long-term care field to help educate people on this topic. And the first one it occurred actually over 40 years ago when my great uncles suffered a major stroke. My parents moved, both my great uncle and great aunt, from Florida up to Illinois to live with us. And for the 2.5 or so years that they lived with us, let me tell you, the stress level in our house increased dramatically. And I feel that actually had a very long-term toll on our family, even well after they passed away. Even to this day, I think there are some aspects that linger in terms of that experience. And one interesting thing was, although he was my father's uncle, the burden of care fell upon my mother's shoulders. And that is a frequent theme that a lot of people see, is that when somebody needs care, very frequently, if there is a female person in the home, that person ends up being the caregiver. And that was the first experience I had. The second experience is actually something I'm currently living through. My 84-year-old father is currently living in a Medicaid nursing home. His health has been declining over the past many years, and it got to the point where my then 80-year-old mother was taking care of him at home, and the stress, quite frankly, was killing her. She was not sleeping. She was not eating properly. She certainly was not taking proper care of herself, and the physical and emotional toll on her was tremendous. And it got to the point where my father was falling with increasing frequency, and it got to the point where his doctor said, it's no longer safe for you to stay at home anymore. So my mother ended up moving him into a Medicaid nursing home. And I'm very grateful that my father is receiving care. But as I'll talk about a little bit later, Medicaid, generally speaking, is not a path you really want to go down. There's a tremendous cost to it, even though it is paid for theoretically by the government. It's a tremendous cost in many, many ways. So those two experiences personally have really driven me to really focus on this so I can help educate people on ways that they can help make sure that similar experiences do not happen to them and their families.
Interesting. Interesting. I'm sure a lot of us have had experiences somewhat like that with the older adults. When we talk about long-term care, Kent, what exactly are we talking about? Is it home care or facility care? What comes under that category?
It's really important to understand that basic concept. What is long-term care? Now, long-term care, or it's sometimes referred to as extended care, it's really the assistance that's needed when someone has a serious impairment. And there are really two different types of impairments: physical impairments and cognitive impairments. Now, a physical impairment, it's the result of a chronic medical condition such as Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, chronic pulmonary disease, and osteoporosis, to name just a few. Now, these impairments can be managed with medication and therapy, but realistically, these are conditions that can never be cured, at least currently. As these conditions progress, they have a direct impact on the activities of daily living. It's a phrase you might hear, ADLs, activities of daily living. These are really the basic functions that we often take for granted. And these include bathing, continence, which is bladder and bowel control, dressing, eating, transferring, which is really moving from one place to another, for instance, from your bed to a chair and anywhere else, and toileting, which is essentially the basic hygiene of going to the bathroom. Now, for someone whose mobility is diminished by a physical impairment, illness, or disability, these simple tasks, quite frankly, can be extremely difficult or even impossible without human assistance. Now, a cognitive impairment, which is the other type of impairment, is generally defined as a deterioration or the loss of intellectual capacity, which includes short or long-term memory, orientation as to a person, place, and time, deductive or abstract reasoning, or judgment as it relates to safety awareness. And that's actually very key, particularly, with someone who might not be aware of really what's going on around them. Now, most extended care, long-term care that is, or like for instance, 90% of it it encompasses something called custodial care. And that's really what I described. That's those conditions that cannot be cured, even though they can sometimes be managed through medication or therapy. So like I say, 90% of extended care is custodial care. Skilled care, which frequently takes place in, say, a hospital or sometimes at home, that is a type of care that is so complex that it requires a doctor to create a plan of care for a person. And that's really what I would describe as long-term care is, primarily custodial care and sometimes skilled care.
Okay. So when we talk about that type of care, can you give us just a feel for what the costs are in this area?
Absolutely. And it varies by region. But in the Chicagoland area, the average cost of care anywhere will depend upon the level of care that a person receives. On the low end, it would be something like adult daycare, where you might drop your loved one off for a few hours a day to give you a break. The next level of care might be home care, where you have somebody come into your home to take care of your loved one. Up from there would be assisted living, and then it would probably graduate to skilled care, or like, for instance, a nursing home. In the Chicagoland area, currently, adult daycare on a monthly basis is about $1,700 a month on average. And it depends upon how frequently you use it, of course. But on an annual basis, that translates to about $20,000 a year. Now, home care, for instance, that next level up, is going to be roughly about $5,100, $5,200 a month, which translates to about $61,000, $62,000 per year. Now, assisted living is roughly about the same neighborhood, about $5,000 a month, or $61,000, $62,000 per year. Nursing home, however, it starts jumping up fairly dramatically. Now, in the Chicagoland area, we're looking at about maybe $8,300 per month for a semi-private room, meaning you're going to have a roommate, or maybe, $8,700, $8,800 per month for a private room. The important thing I want to really emphasize is that, as you can see, care is expensive, and it's going to get more expensive, particularly since we are aging as a population. So the population of people is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. There are not always, well, quite frankly, there's a shortage of caregivers. So the cost of care goes up. Now, for instance, if someone is, say, 60 years old today, although those numbers I gave to you are roughly, what it averages in this area today, you might not need care for, say, 20 years. So at age 80, let's take a look at the cost of care then. So for instance, adult daycare could be $3,000 a month, or $36,000 per year. Home care and assisted living will be roughly a little over $9,000 per year, or maybe $110,000, $112,000 per year. Nursing home care, if you need that 20 years from now, we're looking at about $15,000, $16,000 per month, which translates to about $180,000 to $190,000 per year. I sometimes give an extreme example. Chicago is actually, although that's expensive, it's not horrendous. If you happen to live in Alaska, the average, although home care, assisted living is maybe roughly comparable to what it is here, nursing home care goes up drastically. Currently, nursing home care in Alaska is a little over $1,000 per day of care. And so I just want to help put some of these numbers in perspective to help people understand that it's going to be kind of crazy expensive to pay for your care.
Now, those are pretty out of sight numbers. How do people pay for these type of services?
Question. Actually, a lot of the care provided in the United States these days is free. I'm being somewhat facetious by that, because what I mean by that is I want to really bring in a very sobering fact. 41 million people in the United States these days are providing unpaid care for family members. 41 million people. That's people who are experiencing a tremendous amount of stress, physically, emotionally, and financially. Now, when we talk about other means of paying for care, let's talk about, actually, I want to hover a bit more on those caregivers. The reason it's so stressful is, providing care to you will make those people that you love as chronically ill as you are. For instance, if you have, a child or children, at least one of them is likely to put aside his or her life for two reasons. Now, if your spouse or partner, who's taking care of you, they are realistically going to start to buckle from the constant stress of providing care. So your kids might step up to the plate and realizing it's like, oh my goodness, mom or dad who's taking care of, the ill or sick spouse, parent, they're suffering tremendously. So we're going to step in and try and do what we can to help out. Now, for instance, the second reason a child might step in is if they see the surviving parent who has been taking care of the sick parent, buckle from care, they're going to end up taking care of what was the healthy spouse, but is now the sick spouse. So it's a vicious cycle, quite frankly. And if there are more than one child, adult child, it's almost guaranteed that the responsibility of providing care will not be shared equally. And this has an interesting effect because it causes hard feelings between the siblings, and it frequently destroys sibling relationships. And unfortunately, at that point, the sick parent can only watch as his or her children don't speak to each other anymore. I see that played out over and over again. And it's heartbreaking to the parent who actually became sick. Now, I want to dispel some common misperceptions regarding other types of care, other things that people might think will pay for care. Let's talk about Medicare. A lot of people think, hey, I've worked hard my whole life. I paid my taxes. The government will take care of me. Well, they think Medicare will step in and pay for my care. Unfortunately, let's take a look at that. That's really not the case, because Medicare is health insurance, and it really pays for skilled or rehabilitative care. And that's really your acute care as opposed to chronic care. Acute care is when you're, quite frankly, expected to get better. When you're suffering from chronic care needs, you're realistically not going to get better, because what you have is a care condition that's realistically going to last for the rest of your life. That's custodial care. Now let's talk about Medicaid. Medicaid is actually the largest payer of extended care or long-term care in the United States. However, as I mentioned earlier, when I talked about my dad, it is not a path that you want to go down, because quite frankly, you had to qualify for Medicaid. In essence, you have to impoverish yourself. You have to spend down your assets on your care to roughly about $2,000. And there are some things you're allowed to keep. You get to keep your home, or if your spouse is living there. And Medicaid actually has something called a 5-year look back, because a lot of people think, oh, wow, if that's the requirement to qualify for Medicaid, I'm going to transfer my assets out of my estate to my adult kids. Therefore, it'll make it easier for me to qualify, and my kids can help out, somewhere down the road if need be. That is not something you want to do, because the government will take a look at your bank statements. They'll take a look at your financial statements and look back over the past 5 years and determine, okay, have you transferred money out of your estate to help yourself qualify and impoverish yourself on paper to qualify for Medicaid? If you do, that is a very unpleasant thing that happens, because the government will then penalize you in terms of time. They will make a calculation based upon the amount that you transferred out of your estate and determine, okay, you now have to essentially self-fund your care for X number of months before you will actually qualify for Medicaid. So Medicaid cannot be a viable funding source to pay for a plan of care at home, because it pays for little or nothing for home care, adult daycare, or assisted living. Now, and also Medicaid is really no help in protecting the emotional and physical well-being of your caregivers for all of the years at your home. And as I mentioned, Medicaid is not free. So for instance, if you have to, liquidate your assets, particularly qualified funds like a retirement account or low cost based assets, the moment you do that, there's an immediate and, quite frankly, sometimes a very serious tax payment that you have to make. And then once on Medicaid, your spouse will lose most, if not all, of your monthly income. So like I say, Medicaid, I'm grateful for it because it's paying for my father's care, but it's not a path you really want to go down if you can avoid it. I also want to talk about veterans benefits. If you're a veteran, I encourage you to look into it. And veterans benefits will pay for care. The problem is you may not qualify for it financially. Custodial care is provided primarily for those with limited income and assets. Now, one thing I want to talk about is self-funding. Many people think that they may have enough assets to pay for care. And for those people that think that, they actually may be right. However, assets do not pay for care. Income does. Let's take a look at assets from a different perspective. Now, assets in a retirement portfolio are really capital in nature. What I mean by that is the capital is not meant to be used to pay for care or any other expense in life for that matter. Capital is meant to generate predictable streams of income that will keep up with the rising cost of living. And capital is meant to be something that you cannot outlive. Once you start using capital to pay for care, it creates unintended issues with liquidity. For instance, that means, can any given asset that you have be easily turned into cash to pay for care? As I mentioned earlier, there are unnecessary taxes that you realistically have to pay for if you liquidate low cost basis investments like 401ks and other retirement assets. You have to deal with market timing. This might occur if you have a care need during a down market when your assets really aren't worth as much as they might be during, a bull market. You have to deal with, you may actually have to forego appealing investment opportunities if you have to tap into your capital. And then there's the big uncertainty of how long a care need may last. You really don't know that. And perhaps most importantly, every dollar of capital that's used to pay for care is $1 less that's available to generate income to keep your future commitments. And quite frankly, that leads to a financial death spiral, because reallocating income and assets almost always leads to a severe decline in lifestyle.
Interesting. So what we're saying is that basically self-funding may or may not be an answer, but if you do self-fund, certainly there's some large downsides to it. So how does long-term care insurance fit into all this stuff?
That is something that people might be aware of it a little bit, at least in concept, but long-term care insurance, it's not for everybody, but for the right situation, it can be, quite frankly, a lifesaver. It really helps families out. Long-term care insurance, it really does, well, what it does, people think it's like, well, it pays for care. Absolutely, yes, it does that. But quite frankly, what it does, it pays or it funds a plan for care. And that's really what I want to focus on, is that the goal is for people to avoid the severe consequences that frequently occur when caring for a loved one. And the best way to do that is to put together a plan for potential care needs. And the way to do that is the plan actually will help you remain safe at home for as long as possible while protecting the emotional, the physical, and the financial well-being of those you love. And that's accomplished by mitigating two sets of consequences, which is really common to providing care. You want to be able to hire professionals to provide the care, which minimizes the emotional and physical stress on your spouse, your partner, or your child. And then second, you want to mitigate the cost of paying for their care. And Bill, this is where long-term care insurance can be absolutely ideal. Long-term care insurance is something that you can phrase it this way: you buy it with your health, but you pay for it with your checkbook. And long-term care insurance, there are a few different types of long-term care insurance. So it's what's referred to as traditional long-term care insurance. And this is quite similar to, say, homeowners insurance. You pay your premiums, you have a certain amount of coverage. If you need care at any point in the future, you file a claim, you get the benefits paid back to you in terms of paying for your care. Traditional long-term care insurance is actually a very cost-effective way of paying for your care. It's as far as how it's structured, you're essentially buying a pool of money. And what I mean by that is you select a maximum dollar amount of coverage per day. For instance, let's say $200 per day. You take that amount times 365 days times X number of years that you choose, and that gives you a pool of money that you start from. And that's realistically, a lot of people might think it's like, okay, well, I want, $200 a day, every day, 300 times 65, times 365 days times 5 years. Some people might want for their lifetime, because one thing I want to talk about is cognitive impairments can last a very long time, where your body might be okay, your mind might not be there, but you could end up living a very long time. So the cost of care can be incredibly huge over the cost of time. So, like I say, traditional long-term care insurance is structured that you pay your premiums. If you go on claim, you get, that, $200 a day back, for instance. And one of the things I want to talk about is, maybe some bells and whistles that go along with that. There's one bells and, extra that you can choose to have that A lot of people might think it's an extra, but I really want to stress how important it really is, and that is inflation protection. Because $200 today certainly will not feel like $200 20 years from now. You want to build in some inflation protection if you can, that will have your daily benefit grow every single year over the course of time, so that you have larger amounts, $300 a day, $400 a day, 20 years from now, for instance. And it really helps take the bite out of the cost of care that you're having to pay for. That's traditional type of long-term care insurance. Another type of long-term care insurance that you might hear about is referred to as linked benefit or asset-based long-term care. The way that is structured is there's an underlying asset to that, and that is, for instance, a life insurance policy or perhaps an annuity contract. The way those work is you buy that particular type of policy, and if you have a need for care, you actually use up the dollar amount of, say, that death benefit of the life insurance policy or the annuity contract first. If your care need goes beyond that and you've used that up, you typically will have built into that policy a long-term care component to it that goes then beyond that. And you can build into it sometimes what's referred to as a continuation of benefits that, for instance, could give you benefits for the rest of your life, no matter how long you live. The linked benefit or asset-based type of products typically will cost more than a traditional type of policy. But comparing the two, sometimes people view the traditional type of policy as a use it or lose it type of scenario, that, again, you pay your premiums, but if I don't use it, you don't get any benefits back to it. And for a lot of people, it's like, that's kind of a raw deal. That doesn't sound really great. But I want to put that in perspective, actually, because very, very likely you have homeowners insurance. And that's the type of thing that, quite frankly, you never hope you have to use your homeowners insurance. I don't know anybody who's like, wow, I want my home to burn down so I can make sure I get the benefit out of my homeowners insurance. Traditional long-term care insurance is somewhat similar to that. If you never need care, hey, you're right, you never get a benefit out of your policy. But the way I view it is, quite frankly, you've won the lottery of life, where you've never needed care and you've had a very healthy life for the rest, for the entirety of your life. With a linked benefit or asset-based type of policy, although you might pay more for it in premium, you're guaranteed to get something back out of it. If you need care, it pays for your care. But if you pass away prior to needing care, your survivors or your beneficiaries will get a death benefit out of that. And at some point, it might be somewhere down the road where it's built up, say, a cash value in the life insurance component to it. If you decide, I'm tired of paying premiums, I'm done with this, you can actually get money out of it. So whether you live, quit, or die, you will get some money out of it. But so there's a trade-off. You pay more for it in premium, but you will get something back out of it.
So what about cost of long-term care insurance? I know it depends on several factors, but if someone were 60 years old, can you give us a ballpark of what they would be paying, that person would be paying?
Sure, absolutely. It's a really important question. That's the question that, of course, is running through everybody's mind, whether or not they want to ask it or not, but you have to ask it. As you mentioned, Bill, it varies. It depends upon your age, and very importantly, it depends upon your health. But it also depends upon the structure that you have. And whereas I mentioned earlier, you get to choose the maximum daily benefit, you get to choose, the benefit period. Do I want it to last, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years, or for the rest of my life? Obviously, the longer that you have as a benefit period, the more it costs. But very commonly, we'll see, $200 a day, a 5-year benefit period. That's one of the more common scenarios we see. And for a traditional policy, we're probably looking about, $3,500, maybe $4,000 per year for a policy. And yes, that's money, But again, considering what it gives you the peace of mind, knowing that the chance that your loved one will have to set aside their life to take care of you, that risk is minimized tremendously. And quite frankly, it's a comforting feeling more than anything else. So that's just an example. And when people ask me how much does it cost, quite frankly, the answer I usually give them is, I can make the premium anything you want it to be. And it's important that the premium fits within your budget. I don't want someone to ever bite off something more than they can chew premium wise. But obviously, the more money you can actually contribute to your plan, the more of a benefit it will give you, the more comfort you have, and the more comfort that your family actually has, knowing that they don't necessarily have to step up to the plate and provide your care or be your caregiver. In terms of a linked benefit type of policy, that's very frequently what you might see is a lump sum upfront, and you can also pay it, monthly, yearly, whatever it might be. But to give you an example, maybe a lump sum upfront, if someone has maybe $150,000 sitting in a CD in the bank that's not really doing a whole lot, or they might not necessarily need for anything other than emergency purposes, like a long-term care need, $150,000 up front will give you, a decent policy, and you can actually add additional things to that, where, if you want, for instance, to have lifetime benefits, that might cost you maybe an ongoing premium of, $300, $400 per month thereafter. But again, it's more than, say, a traditional policy, but again, you're getting more from it benefit-wise. But those are just a couple of examples of, typical costs that we might see. But again, as you mentioned, Bill, there's a lot that goes into it: age, health, structure of the policy, et cetera.
Okay. Now, I know there have been some states that have come out with their own type of program for long-term care insurance. Can you just comment about those states that you know about and what kind of program they have and what it means for us here in Illinois?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, there's one that's currently going on as we speak. As a matter of fact, November 1st is actually a really key date for the state of Washington. As we all know, government programs are stretched pretty thin, and the government's trying to do everything it can to cut costs anywhere they can. The state of Washington is dealing with Medicaid like everybody else is. And Medicaid is a federal program, but it's administered by each of the 50 states. The state of Washington is trying to cut costs for their Medicaid program. What they are doing, they are imposing a payroll tax on all W-2 employees in the state of Washington. And that's a payroll tax on wages, bonuses. You've got a lot of software developers in the state of Washington, so it's going to be things like stock grants. That anything that's reported on their W-2 statement is going to be taxed effective January 1st. And the amount of the tax is 0.58%, which doesn't sound like a lot. It's a little over 1/2%. But for the average middle-class person, over the course of time, that really starts adding up. And what this tax actually gives those people that are hit with that tax, they're going to get some long-term care benefits. However, there are some very serious limitations to that. Currently, the lifetime maximum benefit for their program is $36,500. That's $100 per day. And like I say, that's the maximum for the life of the program. They might ratchet that up over the course of time. Who knows? That's yet to be determined. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that people in the state of Washington who were potentially going to be hit with this, if they could show that they had their own private long-term care insurance policy in place by November 1st, so just days from now, they could actually opt out of that tax. what that would do for them is, if it makes sense for them to get their own private long-term care insurance policy, they don't have to pay that tax going forward, which is a nice thing for them. And it's any private long-term care insurance policy, they're going to get far more in benefits for the amount of money that they paid. And forgive me, actually, one weakness I wanted to point out of the government program for Washington is that if you move out of the state of Washington, and let's say you've paid into this tax for years and years and years, unfortunately, you will not get a penny of benefit out of that. So if you retire out of state, forget it. It doesn't matter. You've made a nice contribution to help defray the cost of Medicaid in the state, but that's kind of a harsh reality that people are facing if they want to move out of the state. But the reason I'm bringing this up, it's like, oh, who cares what's happening in the state of Washington? There are a large handful of states currently that are very closely paying attention to what's happening in the state of Washington. The state of Illinois is one of those states, because they're, as I think everybody realizes, the state of Illinois is pretty strapped for cash. They're very quick to impose taxes on us. They may impose a similar type of program in the future. They may not. But I want people to understand is that they can do far more for themselves on a private policy basis and really help themselves, help their families out if they do planning ahead of time. And like I say, Illinois might not implement something, but they might. California is actually already in the process of crafting and strategizing what that structure is going to be for them, because they were already committed to doing that. Governor Newsom has actually tasked the insurance commissioners in the state to put something together to actually implement a similar program to what the state of Washington has. So I want people to start thinking about this to really be proactive. And like I say, it might not be long-term care insurance might not be ideal for the average person, but it might be. And I want people to at least take a look at it so they can make an informed decision that feels right to them.
Okay. Well, we've been going over a bunch of the characteristics of long-term care insurance, and there's a heck of a lot more that we could talk about, but I want to get the audience in for the rest of the time we have here to see if they have any questions for you, Kent. So I'm opening up the floor. You can either use the chat box, or you can just unmute yourself and go from there. Are there any questions thus far?
And just to be clear, if anybody wants to unmute themselves, just go ahead and click that raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, and I can select that for you. Bill, I'm not seeing anything in the chat box. We have Jim who said, thanks for the perspective, Kent.
Absolutely.
Okay, well,
go ahead and put Kent and Bill's contact information into the chat box here. We also have someone who's asking, is there some tipping point as to age?
Very good questions. Matter of fact, one of the most common questions people ask me is, what's the right age to buy long-term care insurance? And I'll actually answer it a couple of different ways. I view it more as in a range of ages that people start paying attention to this and actually start doing appropriate planning for this. And that's really going to be maybe from about the age of 40 up into maybe early 70s. And the reason why that is such a key age range is because people in that age range are watching their parents start to need care, or maybe a close family friend, and they're realizing, oh my goodness, either mom or dad is needing care and I have to step up to the plate and take time off of work, or my work is suffering because I have to take time to take care of mom and dad every single day, or maybe I even have to quit my job to take care of mom and dad, and I cannot bear the idea of this being repeated one more generation to my kids, essentially the grandchildren of the person who's currently needing care. So that's the age range that people most commonly start to, pay attention to it. But more important than age really is almost the mindset that people have. Many people think it'll never happen to me. And you know what? You may be absolutely right. It may never happen to you. You may never need care. But if you do, keep in mind how it impacts the people you love. If it might force someone to be put in a position of having to care for you. I don't think anybody ever really wants their kids to be faced with that, alternative. I don't even want to call it an alternative. I don't want people to be faced with, oh my goodness, I have to do this for dad or mom because there are no other options available to them. They can't actually get long-term care insurance anymore. And that actually brings up to the last point is there's actually a cost to waiting. And it's actually quite significant. As we mentioned, the cost of care is going to go up every single year, no matter what happens, just due to us living longer as a society. Insurance and care providers charge more every single year. But also, as we age, if we wanted to get long-term care insurance or see what it is, it's like, yeah, well, I'm healthy now. I'll just get it, 20 years in the future when I'm likely to, need it. Or maybe 1 year before that. First of all, we can't predict that. But secondly, every year that you wait, premiums are going to go up. So there's actually a significant cost to waiting to just do some important long-term care planning as it relates to long-term care insurance.
Okay. So what type of physical or mental conditions would the underwriters be looking at when they decide whether to approve you or not?
Very good question. It's kind of interesting because some people might think it's like, well, I've had high blood pressure my whole life, or I've got high cholesterol. There are some conditions that might give you cause for concern, but if they're being treated with medication or therapy on an ongoing basis and they're under control, it tends to be actually not much of an issue. The health conditions that are more of a concern to the long-term care insurance companies will be something like Parkinson's, something like osteoporosis, things that are going to really potentially hinder your ability to get through your average day, movement, mobility, things along those lines. If you use a cane or a walker or a wheelchair, that's realistically something that might get you declined from, say, your typical long-term care insurance. One thing I do want to point out is, though, if a person might not qualify for traditional long-term care insurance, or maybe even some hybrid type of policies or asset-based linked benefit type of policies, there are other types of alternatives that are available. Hopefully, you would qualify for them. For instance, there are some short-term policies out there which actually go for, say, 360 days. And it might not sound like a long time, but they're typically more lenient in terms of their underwriting or evaluation process. And every little bit helps the families if somebody has something in place, and they can actually be quite cost effective. So I encourage people to take a look at it, even if they have some conditions that they might not think are, they might think that would knock them out of contention. What I always recommend is, let's sit down, talk about your situation, cover, what are your health issues. And what I do is we send that out to an anonymous basis. We don't attach your name to it. And we say, okay, client X, male, this age, these health conditions. We're looking at this type of structure for a policy, and we essentially shop it out to the different, insurance companies that we work with. Like I say, we work with all the major carriers out there, and we'll get answers back. It's like, it's like, no, we're not willing to take a look at them. Others actually might come back and say, hey, you know what, we're actually comfortable with that type of policy or health condition. We're willing to extend care. So at that point, we'll actually go through an approval process, application process, excuse me. And what's involved with the underwriting is the application, and you authorize your doctor to release medical records to the insurance company. The insurance company will evaluate that. And the companies always reserve the right to require a face-to-face interview with you, and it's always at the company's expense, not at your expense. Usually if someone's maybe 70 years old or older, most of the time they will require a face-to-face interview. And really what they're looking for is, do you look like you're healthy? Can you get up? Are you, can you move around? Are there any real obvious physical impairments that give them cause for concern? They might ask you some questions, to determine your cognitive abilities. Can you list 5 men's names, for instance? And then a little later in the interview, they might say, hey, you remember that list of men's names that you stated? How many of those can you remember? So they're looking for things to really get a sense of, are you still pretty sharp cognitively? So these are things that they're going to be looking for. And one thing I really, really want to stress is a question that people ask me. Okay, how are claims paid out? And the way that's an important thing here is, if someone's health starts to decline, you start needing help, talk to your doctor. If your doctor says you need help with any 2 of those activities of daily living, or if it looks like you have a cognitive impairment that requires supervision from somebody else to make sure you're safe at home, that's a real key thing, is to get a statement from your doctor, submit a claim to the company after you've, assuming you've been approved to have your own policy. But one thing I really want to stress is, it's actually really important to have things like your powers of attorney in place that really match what your desires are. So I strongly encourage you to, talk to Bill. If you work with, your own attorney that you have, sit down with them, talk to them, make sure your documents are in order, because that's going to be key when it comes time to make a claim, because you want to make sure that the insurance company can legally talk to, say, your adult kids if you have a cognitive impairment where you might not be able to talk. And you want to make sure that your documents are up to date, in place, and really correspond to your wishes. So please talk to Bill about that and set up some time.
Any other questions that anyone can think of or you want to discuss? Could you quickly go through those services that long-term care insurance covers? I know it'll cover home care and assisted living and custodial care. Any other type of care that
It
insurance
does.
will cover?
Absolutely. As I mentioned, there could be, adult daycare, but there's a lot of things about our daily lives that I think we all take for granted. And it's, cleaning the house, cooking meals, things like that. You could have someone come into your home to do that for you, where it could be, unsafe for you to do that yourself. And if you need help with that, the long-term care insurance policies will help out in that respect too. So like I say, it's a lot of these things that you and I typically might not think about, because like I say, we take it for granted because we can do it just fine because we're in good health currently. But it's things like that that really make our life work in so many different ways. Yes, it pays for your care. Another aspect to it would be, for instance, if you end up being in, if an assisted living community is ideal for you, it pays your rent at an assisted living community. In addition to, some care there. Certainly it pays, as you mentioned, home care. the care you received at assisted living or nursing home care. It pays for so many different aspects to that. And one thing I want to talk about is actually a service that's provided by most of the primary, reputable long-term care insurance companies out there. It's really kind of a concierge type of service that helps guide people through the process. Once someone starts needing care, starting to fail physically, or maybe there's a cognitive impairment that's really starting to become a concern, you file a claim. Each insurance company, they will have someone that's actually assigned to your particular case that will guide you through the process, filing the paperwork, making sure that everything you need is really starting to fall into place as needed. If you need help, finding care communities, for instance, or finding care providers in your area, they will help with that. It's a nice service because most people that are experiencing a need for care, they're in it for the first time and they're panicking. I've never experienced it before. I don't know what to do. I'm drawing a blank. I don't know what to do. There are people with the insurance companies that help guide you through the process, to help relieve your sense of stress, and help tell you, okay, the process, the next steps you really need to do. Let's help you walk through it and make sure everything falls into the place as stress-free as possible.
We've got about 6 minutes left. I will keep asking questions of Kent if no one else has questions. Kent, what about when you make it, is there someone there? Guess not. What about when you make a claim, do you still pay the premiums?
Generally speaking, no. And it depends upon the policy, but generally speaking, no. For the reputable companies out there, there is what's referred to as waiver of premium. So let's say you need care, you file a claim, you're starting to receive benefits. At that point in time, you no longer have to pay your premiums while you need care. It might be a circumstance, say you actually get better, and then you no longer need those benefits at that point in time. Maybe you haven't used up all of your benefits, so there's still money left in that pool of benefits that I mentioned earlier. But if you no longer need, benefits, your doctor says, yeah, you're actually doing okay. At that point in time, the premium payments would resume. But if then you need care again in the future, premium payments no longer need to be paid. And for a lot of the policies, if there is, say, a joint policy, you and your spouse have a policy, for a lot of the companies out there, it's built in such that if one spouse gets sick, needs care, goes unclaimed, that waiver premium certainly kicks in, but it actually kicks in for the healthy spouse, where the healthy spouse does not have to pay premiums on his or her policy. That is a nice thing. One caveat to that, as I mentioned, there are some short-term policies out there, which, again, this might be for someone who might not qualify for a typical long-term care insurance policy. For the short-term policies, great as they are, that's a good benefit, but a lot of them out there do not have that waiver of premium to it, whereby if you're receiving the benefits, you still do have to pay those premiums even while you are receiving the benefits. But for a lot of those policies, I'll give you an example of, one of the policies out there, it's got a spectacular, prescription benefit for prescription drugs. And if you end up using a lot of prescriptions, the benefit for that, quite frankly, ends up paying for the bulk of your premiums. And it's, I won't say it's making it cost free, but sometimes it could be pretty close.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Well, Kent, thank you. This has been very informative, and I've learned a lot too about some of the nuances of long-term care insurance. And if people want to get a hold of you, there is in the chat your information and your email about how they, basically your phone number and your email. They can get a hold of you both ways. So, and if anyone has questions, certainly Kent is a great resource if you just want to talk to him about long-term care insurance and the alternatives. So we'll sign off now. Thank you, audience.
Forgive me, Bill. I'm sorry if I apologize to interrupt. One thing I also wanted to mention, it can help with the premium payments, is if someone actually has a business. This is actually, I'll put it this way: the IRS doesn't give us much of a benefit ever, but in the area of long-term care insurance, they're actually highly incented to make it more affordable for people. So, for instance, if employees have, if it makes sense to buy long-term care insurance, if the company checkbook pays for it, there are some actually tremendous tax benefits that can actually make the premiums far more palatable, and depending upon the type of business, for instance. And it's something where you can actually do a carve out, say maybe just the owners of the company want to have policies, and so the company wants to pay for it for just the owners, but maybe you can't afford it for all of the employees of the company. The IRS allows for that. There are no ERISA rules that you have to abide by from that perspective. So I encourage you to look into that, because it can be a very cost-effective way of paying for a policy. It actually, like I say, it's a nice thing that the IRS allows you, and take advantage of anything the IRS gives you.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. Okay, thank you again, and thank you, audience. We'll be sending out another alert on our next webinar in November. And again, thank you, Kent, for your presentation and your insight on long-term care insurance.
Thank you so much, Bill. I appreciate it, and I appreciate everybody's attendance.
Okay, have a good weekend, and we'll see you next month.
Take care.